Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're back now with more from Republican Senator Mike Lee. Senator, you heard the defense secretary say there was not one definitive, specific piece of intelligence that indicated these 4 embassy attacks were being planned. It was a belief. Does that give you pause?
No, not necessarily. Look, I want to be clear. Within hours after General Soleimani was killed, I made a public statement to the effect that the fact that he is dead is a good thing. It's a positive signal for the safety and security of the American people. And I stand by that.
So hopefully we'll pick it up. Standing by, though, in Richmond. I'm going live now to Virginia Senator Tim Kaine. Good morning to you, Senator.
Good morning, Margaret.
You and Senator Lee have actually found some common cause here, despite the difference in your parties, on a frustration regarding the president's lack of consultation with Congress. And I want to dive into that. But let's start off specifically on what we learned. Because you are on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which has oversight of the State Department and therefore embassies, were you aware that there was any kind of threat specifically to Embassy Baghdad and 3 other posts, as the president has described?
No, I wasn't, Margaret. I was at the classified briefing because I'm both an armed services and foreign relations member. That was not told to us in the classified briefing, nor was there a suggestion that multiple embassies were threatened. And I think that was one of the reasons that the senators in the briefing were so unhappy. We felt that the evidence was far short of imminent threat. We were mad that they were so dismissive of the notion that Congress would have anything to do with questions of war and peace. And we also thought that the administration was very cavalier about the Iraqi reaction, the Iraqi resolution of Parliament that the U.S. should leave. They were sort of like, oh, that's just the way the Iraqis talk. This is a very serious concern, and the administration was downplaying it in a way that I think was very unrealistic.
But specifically, the defense secretary said the Gang of 8 was told in specific detail, and they chose not to share it with members of Congress. You are saying that you were never told of a threat to the U.S. Embassy.
No. And as I've talked to the Gang of 8, again, this is classified information. I'm not going to put that all on the table, but members of the Gang of 8 on the Senate side were not happy with the degree of this question of was there an imminent threat. The administration says there was exquisite and detailed intelligence. That means it was specific. But for it to justify the president taking essentially an act of war on Iraqi soil to wipe out an Iranian military leader, it had to not just be a plan, but an imminent threat, and that usually means it's more than a plan. There's been some move toward making a decision to execute on the plan, and we heard nothing about that in the briefing or in any of the conversations I've had with administration leaders.
Why is it not sufficient enough for the administration to say broadly there was a threat to U.S. personnel in the region, as Esper said, within days? Why don't you trust that?
Well, look, the bottom line is the Constitution makes really plain it's Congress that gets to make the decision about whether to go to war, and ultimately that's a judgment about the troops. We don't want to put our troops in harm's way unless there is deliberation in front of the American people about whether it's important. Now, a president can act unilaterally to stop, defend against an ongoing attack or an imminent threat. But if it's more than that, it's supposed to be for Congress, because Congress will have this debate in a way that the American public will be informed of the stakes. And then if we debate and vote at the end of the day, then it's fair to ask our men and women in uniform to risk their lives and health. But if we're not willing to do that, or if the president tries to rush to war and escalate, then you run the risk of making mistakes that are just so fatal in their consequences, you can hardly ever, undo them.
The president says he doesn't want to go to war. I want to get to that authorization of use of force. We went back and we looked, and the original AUMF from 2001, and then there's one in 2002, but in the wake of the al-Qaeda attacks on this country, that was the premise for this authorization Congress gave at the time. It was then used over the past almost 20 years to send troops to Libya, Turkey, Georgia, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Somalia, Kenya, the Philippines, Cuba. There were Democratic presidents. Why hasn't any party made a full-throated effort to get a new authorization for military force?
Well, Margaret, as you know, I have been working on this since I came to the Senate, and I have the same concern. When I came to the Senate in 2013, I criticized President Obama for taking us into military action in Libya without congressional authorization, for going on ISIS in Iraq and Syria without congressional authorization. I will say this, when I started on this crusade 6, 7 years ago, very few people were interested in it. But in the last year, the good news is, finally, members of both parties and in both houses have started to step up and take the congressional responsibility seriously. I do think we have to rewrite and redo the 2001 authorization that authorized us to wage war against non-state terrorist groups that are connected to the perpetrators of the 9/11 attack.
What you're proposing now, and you have been,
here's what I'm proposing
you're working
now,
with Senator Lee on it, but I just want to point out that there does seem to still be a carve-out for imminent threats.
And there should be.
How would that not stop what the president just did?
Well, Senator Lee and I are basically trying to restore this to its constitutional place. So we have a resolution that would basically say no war against Iran unless Congress specifically votes to authorize it. But we do state, as you point out, the president can defend the nation against an imminent threat. And that is existing law. That's the constitutional framers clearly understood that. We're skeptical of the evidence that this president has put on the table about imminent threat. And that's why we're challenging the briefers, and that's why we're challenging the president. But at the end of the day, I think this is less about the president than it is about Congress. Congresses of both parties for a very long time have hidden under their desks rather than have votes about war. Votes about war are tough. I've cast 2 of them in the Foreign Relations Committee. Fundamentally different than any vote you'll ever cast.
Yeah.
And so many members of Congress, what they want to do is hide under their desk, let the president just do whatever the president wants, and then they think they can escape accountability for the consequences of war. It's time to go back to what the framers envisioned. We shouldn't send our best and brightest into harm's way if Congress doesn't have the guts to have a debate and have a vote.
All right, Senator Kaine, thank you for laying out your case. You were persuasive enough to get Senator Mike Lee on board with this, and he joins us now. Senator, thanks for sticking with us. I know we had some problems with the uplink there, but we can see and hear you now just fine. What Senator Kaine essentially said here is no elected official wanted to get their hands dirty and go on the record to vote for a war, which is why Congress is allowed for this to continue without a new vote on an AUMF. Can you get other Republicans on board with this beyond yourself and Rand Paul?
Yes, we can, and I believe we will. Look, Mike Grievance here is not with the President of the United States. He's exercised his power with great restraint and respect for the Constitution. It's not even really as much with the briefers, even though I didn't love the briefing the other day, as it is with Congress. Congress is the problem. We have to remember that this isn't just about this president or this war. This is about the future question of what any president can do to get us into any war. Over many decades, Congresses and White Houses of every conceivable partisan combination have led us down this path where it's very easy for members of Congress to wash their hands of it, to step away and say this isn't our problem. And we have created this problem. We created the give a full explanation.
All right, Senator, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Fine, thank you.
We had some interruption there. You spoke to the president. Have you received any private assurance that Congress would be consulted if he plans to take future military action against Iran?
Yes, and it's always implicit that we will be consulted. I always want to make sure that any step that is taken is either authorized by one of the AUMFs in question, 02 or 01, or that there is some indication that the strike in question is necessary in order to repel an imminent or actual attack on the United States. That's always the question, and it's one of the reasons why I'm co-sponsoring Tim Kaine's resolution, is to make clear that neither the 01 nor the 02 authorization can be read fairly to authorize a war against Iran.
But there are things short of war. There is hostile activity. There is, a targeted strike like this. And in what you are supporting here, this resolution, there is still a carve-out for an imminent threat. So how would that stop the administration from doing again what it just did?
Well, anytime we have something like this and we've signaled in advance that it's not covered by an existing AUMF, then yeah, we're relying on the good faith use of the commander-in-chief power by the president. This is not a new precedent. It's not contingent on or rooted in this presidential administration. This goes back to 1791, when George Washington pointed out that it's okay for the president to act in order to repel an actual or imminent attack without authorization from Congress. But he also noted that it's important that any sustained military effort does have to be authorized.
Senator Lee, thank you for joining us. Next time, I hope you're here sitting across from me so we can see and hear each other more clearly next time. We'll be back in a moment with former Secretary of State John Kerry. Iowa and the presidential campaign trail, where former Secretary of State John Kerry is on a campaign bus trip with former Vice President Joe Biden, and you can hear that bus generator going in the background. Good morning to you, Mr. Secretary.
Sorry about that. Good morning, Margaret. Good to be with you.
I want to pick up kind of where we just left off with the two senators. You know, you've been touting Joe Biden's foreign policy experience as a reason voters should consider voting for him. Bernie Sanders, his opponent, has taken that on as a reason essentially not to specifically focusing in on Biden's vote to help authorize the war in Iraq. He called it appalling that after 18 years, Joe Biden still refuses to admit he was dead wrong in the Iraq War, the worst foreign policy blunder in modern American history. Given what you know about the region and how Iran was essentially empowered by that, why doesn't he just call it a mistake?
Well, I think, in fact, Margaret, I think that Bernie, regrettably, is distorting Joe's record in the following sense. I mean, he doesn't have what Joe Biden has, which is 8 years of sitting on the National Security Council and demonstrating his judgment, whether it was on his leadership dealing with the migration that was flowing across our border and helping to resolve that with the presidents of those countries, or his work pulling troops out of Iraq and negotiating that and working as perhaps the lead point man on that effort. I think that I know very well what Joe's position was, because I answered those questions back in 2002, 2003, and 4. And it was very clear that what we were doing was listening to a president who made a pledge that he was going to do diplomacy, that he was going to exhaust diplomacy, build a coalition. And ultimately, we learned, as Joe did and I did, that the intelligence was distorted. So Joe spoke out and criticized. Joe was against what they were doing. The vote was not a vote specifically to go to war. It was a vote for the president to have leverage with respect to getting Saddam Hussein back to the negotiating table, back to the inspections, excuse me. And I think we were let down, and Joe has said many times that it was a mistake, obviously, to trust the words of the administration who didn't follow through on what they said they were going to do. And I invite you to go back, read my speech on the floor and others, where I said this is not a vote specifically to let the president go to war. So I think Bernie is trying to drive a wedge in there. I understand that. But I think the vice president has unparalleled, demonstrated accomplishment and success in foreign policy as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee and as vice president. And he, in my judgment, is the one person running for president who, the moment he takes office, has the ability to be able to address a lot of questions, including the credibility of the United States. Joe has told the truth. People know that. And I think they will trust in his capacity to lead the country at a very, very delicate time when foreign policy experience is in fact a premium.
Well, it is, and Iran, an issue you know well, is front and center right now. But virtually every single Democrat running for office right now is claiming the same, or virtually the same, Iran policy, which is to try to revive the deal that you negotiated. There's, some would say, a shell of it left now. Shouldn't voters expect more out of a Iran strategy from someone trying to be commander-in-chief?
Well, Joe Biden is in fact providing more, which is to recognize that it's not enough just to go back to where we were, because obviously circumstances have changed and things have evolved in the last 3.5 years. And what Vice President Biden knows we have to do is make sure now that all the things that we were going to do in the follow-on agreement, which was always contemplated. Margaret, you were there. You're an expert at this. You know exactly what the truth is about it. We were trying to take the nuclear weapon off the table first and then negotiate Yemen, Hezbollah, threats against Israel, the regional question of trafficking of arms. And so Vice President Biden understands that now has to also be front and center as you revive the agreement. But the truth is, France, Germany, Britain, China, Russia are all still trying to keep the agreement in place because they recognize it's the strongest, most transparent, most accountable nuclear agreement on the planet. Well, and it did take a nuclear weapon off the table until President Trump decided unilaterally to ignore all of our allies and move to get out of the agreement.
Well, the president's going on the attack on that deal this morning, specifically mentioning you. Perhaps not a surprise, but you know, I know the deal you negotiated lifted sanctions, gave some relief in exchange for capping the nuclear program. There was also a parallel negotiation that released some cash as part of a settlement of a different, separate dispute. The president this week put blame on the administration, the administration you served on, with essentially helping to provide money to the IRGC. I want to play a soundbite of what you said in 2016 to CNBC when you were asked about how Iran would spend the money.
I think that some of it will end up in the hands of the IRGC or of other entities, some of which are labeled terrorist. You know, to some degree, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every component of that can be prevented, but I can tell you this. Right now, we are not seeing the early delivery of funds going to that kind of endeavor at this point in time. I'm sure at some point some of it will.
I remember talking to you at the time. Money is fungible.
Sure.
Why, though,
Absolutely.
did you
Money
think
is fungible.
that was a risk worth taking if you knew the possibility of what would happen with that money?
Well, what I was really saying, I think, first of all, Margaret, you are an expert at this. You were there. You know that the president's tweet is a lie. And the president tweeted this morning because I am coming on the show, and he knew you'd ask me the question, or he'd push you in a place where you did ask the question. You and the media, I think, need to call a lie a lie. You know
Mr.
they
Secretary,
didn't get $150
I asked you that question in
billion.
2015, too.
No, but let me just finish. You know, yes, and I'll answer that. I was saying clearly some money from the budget of Iran is going to go to the IRGC. It always has. That's no surprise. But the truth is, and President Trump, well, he probably doesn't know this, but the fact is his own Defense Intelligence Agency in 2017 testified to the Congress that very, very little money actually went to the IRGC at all. Most of the money went to the economy of Iran, which is precisely what I said and what we all said. So the IRGC has never had a problem getting money, Margaret. But the fact is, Donald Trump keeps saying they got $150 billion, a lie. He keeps saying that all of that money went to pay for it. It did not. His own Defense Intelligence Agency says most of the money went for the economy of the country. So, you know, we have to stop dealing with questions on Donald Trump's lies and start dealing with the reality of what is going on. The fact is that the vast proportion of that money went to the economy of Iran, and they're always going to be funding the IRGC. There was no question about that. Right. And the IRGC budget has not gone up markedly as a result of what happened with the agreement, period.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us. I want to take a break because we have a report from Iran. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer has been reporting from Tehran all week. Yesterday, she and her team were unexpectedly asked to leave by the Iranian authorities and have now departed Iran. Before they left, she filed this reporter's notebook.
This week ended with the unthinkable. Iran admitted to shooting down a passenger plane, killing everyone on board. But it had begun with the unknowable. What Iran would do to avenge the killing by America of its most revered military hero, Qasem Soleimani.
This is not just a mourning procession, it's a political message.
In all my years of covering Iran, I have never seen such high-stakes drama. Jawad Zarif, Iran's foreign minister, warned the U.S. revenge was coming.
In a clear and proportionate way.
When?
As we choose.
They chose that very night. Iranian missiles fell on 2 U.S. bases in Iraq.
A rocket attack was launched against the Al-Assad air base.
The world held its breath.
The fact that we have this great military and equipment, however, does not mean we have to use it. We do not want to use it.
But with no casualties, America held its fire, and the two old enemies appeared to call it a draw. Ordinary Tehranis heading out in the first real snowfall of the season called it a relief.
Were you relieved when he said there would not be another American attack?
Yes. I sleep very
Well?
very well.
But another bombshell was about to burst.
CBS News has learned that U.S. officials are confident that Iran shot down a Ukrainian jetliner.
On Wednesday morning, wreckage and bodies from Ukrainian Airlines Flight 752 lay strewn across Iran's western suburbs. By Friday, when we managed to reach the site, there was little left, even for the scavengers.
Local people say that yesterday, Thursday, around lunchtime, trucks, cranes showed up and took most of the pieces that were here away.
Amid rumors of a cover-up, world leaders called for an international investigation, and the victims' families prayed for answers to soothe the grief. The answer came suddenly in a stunning TV address that said Iran's army had shot down the plane by mistake. It was a huge admission for this proud and prickly country, which may have appeased critics outside Iran, but it's inflamed them at home. Protests erupted in Tehran last night. Crowds of students who despise the government for its corruption and ineptitude. Iran starts next week, not only in conflict with the U.S., but also with itself.
Elizabeth Palmer reporting from Tehran. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.